podcast. It's great to be back. Championship coming down the road in a couple of days. We're brought once again to you by Bourke Sports, our very generous sponsors. We're back on board again. A couple of very exciting projects coming down the line that we'll talk more about in the coming weeks. But remember, you can get on to burkesports.ie or talk to Norma Clancy, norma.clancy@burkesports.ie for all your equipment and gear needs. Hilda Breslin, delighted to have you with us. You're very welcome. The first ever Kildare woman to be president of the Camogie Association, if Wikipedia is correct, which it always
completely isn't. Incorrect, actually.
There we go. What a start. Series 2 up and running.
No, I'm not president yet. And secondly, Joan O'Flynn was actually Kildare when she was president. Though she was a proud Cork woman as well, but she lived in Kildare and had been involved in Kildare. So
I think that's where the mistake is. So
it's probably one of my family members on Wikipedia, to be honest.
We need to get them onto it. So yeah, we shamed the Dublin board into changing their roll of honour there lately after they made us look bad. So if anyone's out there, make sure.
South Kildare. I will give you the first South Kildare. So.
But look, very exciting times ahead. So I suppose we'll crack on. The announcement was overshadowed a small bit by a bit of a Twitter storm around the dual player motion. And look, I suppose any of our listeners will know, I suppose we've been hard enough on the Camogie Association in the past, but I think it's fair to say on this occasion, there was no way that motion could have been voted in as a rule, was there? It was a non-runner.
I think it was difficult. We had voted it through at the Leinster AGM, but it was in present meeting in January, so we could discuss the difficulties of the rule. What Remote Congress did on Saturday was they put the definition of the dual player into the rule book, and they put that overwhelmingly into the rule book. When it came to the technicality of the rule, there was concerns, and I suppose Remote Congress is brilliant. It was a housekeeping exercise and the work got done, but you don't have the same as a Congress where you can address concerns, you can talk around coffee or the night before. So I think it was always going to be challenging. And I work in regulation, and something we will always say is a bad rule is worse than no rule, because no rule you can work with, but a bad rule will absolutely destroy you. So I think there was a nervousness on the wording of the rule and whether it could be enforced or not. It wasn't a reflection on the dual player by any means. The passing at 76% of the definition of a dual player was the reflection on the dual player. The rest was a reflection at a moment in time, really, on the technicality.
No, definitely. And look, my dad is in the Munster Council and stuff like that, the GA, and I was chatting to him about it, and his opinion on it was, look, it was just far too open to interpretation to be a rule, that it was better as a recommendation. So I suppose maybe it would be fair to say is it that maybe the association left a bit of a communication vacuum, and I suppose maybe that was a knock-on effect of being a virtual Congress, I suppose. Yeah, and look, as is the style in 2020, it was filled with full outrage on Twitter from people who probably maybe, a lot of them who maybe have never been to a camogie match, but also a lot of people who I thought might know better than to jump in and stick the boot in. But look, I suppose maybe the communication of the whole thing could have been a small bit better, maybe.
It's difficult because at a normal Congress we'll have media there, and people will address that, and people will be interviewed, and that'll all be explained. And I think that was done at the LGFA Congress, that Helen O'Rourke and Mary Hickey, they explained the rationale. When you're in remote Congress in 3 separate rooms in Croke Park with half a dozen people, that doesn't happen. Notwithstanding that, I think, yes, we could have come out with a different message. I mean, anyone I spoke to was very, very understanding that the technicality of the rule was the issue. And I think sometimes when you get a bunch of administrators in a room and we see the technicality of a rule, we think maybe other people automatically see the issue with something, and we need to explain that better to people. We should have been out in front of it.
And it's just the modern way of communicating, isn't it? That it just takes one person to light the torch paper on Twitter, and it took off, and everybody's outraged. And but look, I think for once, we'll go on record as saying we think you got it right this time. We're definitely backing you on this. So that's 2 things in series 2 that we've done unusually. But look, I suppose motion aside, look, it is tough on the dual players, isn't it, to be working under 2 different organisations. I think maybe a lot of people don't really grasp how that works either. I suppose is probably part of the problem. Would a closer working relationship with the LGFA be something that's high up your agenda in your term, or is that more the CEO's role to drive that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've always worked very closely with the LGFA, even in Kildare. You know, that's how I've always worked and got on very well with LGFA, and I would intend to. And we always have at fixtures, competitions level, we've always done that. I mean, I can see where people will say, if we were the one association, we were this, we were one, you know, these things might be easier. But the GA, you know, in some ways, ladies football and Camogie are unique in having so many dual players. Because if you compare us to the GA, which is one association, they don't have at the same level of a crossover between the elite hurler and the elite footballer. So there is concerns, and there's always going to be issues. We have different rules on ages, and we've all these things to contribute. So it is difficult, but it is not to say that it isn't workable. And I think that the communication lines between ourselves and ladies football are excellent. This year is a difficult year, and I think we've all said from the start of March, we won't be back, we will be back. It's going to be a new championship. It's a very difficult year. In a normal year, the working relationship between ladies football and Camogie is very good, and it's particularly good between the competitions administrator on both sides. So we do liaise with people, we do swap matches, we do alternate. We do get to stages where, because, you know, the reality is, Adrian, as much as we love to say we're all treated equally by the media, we're not treated equally by the media. The RT coverage for Camogie is an enormous growth area. And in the last 5 years, we've progressed from maybe our finals on RTE to getting the Sunday game, getting the quarters, the semis and the final, and equally LGFA are getting theirs on TG Car, but that puts in an added issue, because then what we do get told by RT is there is a narrow window and this is the window that you have. So those things are difficult, but in a normal year I would say that 95% of the fixture clashes are worked out. You don't hear about them because they're worked out. What you hear about is the one or two enormous fixture clashes. I would hope that going forward, certainly at a club and a county level, that we can put in place structures and a more formalised relationship so that we can have a fixture schedule that people can work from. I've always said in fixtures, you need to be able to tell a girl when she's playing, and you need to be able to give a structure to a fixtures competition. I remember when I started, you know, people might have been told the championship will start in July, and that was as much as they got in terms of club. And that's not workable anymore. People are working and they're getting family commitments. You've got to put that in place. And as part of that is working with ladies football so that we've both got a fixture schedule that works for us. So yes,
definitely. Look, that's a valid point you make about the dual players. I suppose the GA has killed off the dual player. So I suppose it is unique to women's sport. Like, personally, I think it'd be a shame if it wasn't workable. It's something in UL that we value highly as well. We've always had crossover between the O'Connor and the Ashbourne and stuff like that.
Like, it's a brilliant issue to have players that are at both codes. It is an absolute brilliant to be able to say that they play both codes at the level that they do and all the way up. And I don't think any of us would ever suggest that people shouldn't be playing both codes. Well, I certainly wouldn't. And, you know, you want to encourage that, but I suppose you've also got to realise that there is difficulties around that. And we have players that will play hockey, or we have players that will play other sports as well. And I suppose it's working around all of the contingencies and the factors in schedules. That's difficult, no more so than this year, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's it. And look, I suppose you touched on something there, just to talk about the TV deal with that the LGFA have with TG Car, and I suppose the few bits that are on RTE. I suppose we're looking for positives over the year. It's hard to find them, but one of the positives, I suppose, from COVID would have been that the number of club games that were streamed, like the accessibility of the action around the country and stuff like that. And the viewing figures were quite high in a lot of the counties, by all accounts as well. Like, would a more expansive TV deal be something that you'd be hoping to pursue in your term? Is it something that's a priority for the association?
Yeah, I mean, we'd love more coverage. We get a feature game on the Sunday game, but we get maybe 5 minutes. That has moved from where it was a clip with no conversation around it to actually a panel discussion. We get the quarterfinals, the semis and the finals on, and last year we got the Premier Junior live for the first time, and the intermediate. That's progressed a long way, and I think we'd want to keep progressing that. One of the the beauties and the huge successes we've had over the last couple of years was the streaming of the Littlewoods and the league. And we started that. That progressed then this year in the club championship. And I think we were used to streaming in Camogie, I suppose, and we had a system in place, and we're streaming in the Liberty Championship. To me, the streaming is a huge thing, because that means we can widen the area and we can widen the market, and it's relatively reasonable to do it, and it widens it to not just the Irish market but the whole world. I would love for every single Camogie game to be on TV. I think if people see the game, they become enthralled in it and they start to follow it. But in the short term, it's probably going to be streaming and try and increase the number of, you know, if we can get the club championship, the AIB All-Ireland Club Championships are absolutely spectacular. And before you say it, I absolutely know Thomastown are in the list.
Okay, don't worry about that in January, February.
But, you know, if we can get those games on TV, you know, I think they're the games that if you can get them on and people see them, then you build momentum around these championships. So, yes, I would love to encourage it. But, you know, we're limited in many ways. You know, we have 18 staff and we have a budget of just over 2 million. So when you compare Camogie Association and its volunteers and its staff, its dedicated staff, and what they do on the resources that we have, to some counties will be turning over multiples of that. So when you compare us as a national association, in many ways we've got to target where we can and where we think we'll get the most from it. In the short term, I think that's probably streaming, and we'll start pushing for more coverage on terrestrial TV. But in the short term, if we can up the streaming of all of the club games and the championship, I'd be very happy if we finish this year with the Liberty Championship streamed every single round.
Yeah, that would be a real step forward. I suppose the first challenge is getting it out there to the public. I suppose David really has spoken here in the past about the game needing to be a product that the public want to consume. I suppose I just had an interesting experience, I suppose, in the last month. That obviously we had the county final with Thomastown. We conceded an awful lot of frees early doors that probably wouldn't have been frees in a hurling match. Now look, that's beside the point. That's the rules, and that's it. Was at a few challenge matches lately, and one of the games I was tracking stats for, the team A gave away 3 scoreable frees in the whole game, and it was a fantastic game. There was nobody injured. Spoke to the referee after, and he felt that the new rules had given him that freedom to let the game go. So, look, I think that's a real positive. I think it needs to be a product that the public want to consume. So, I think that this is definitely something, hopefully, a positive step forward. How do you feel about the new rules in general, and where do you see the game going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm on record on the trial rules. I was part of the implementation. I think the trial rules are great. I understand people have a reluctance. We have a situation where you can only amend the playing rules every 3 years. People are reluctant to amend something that can't be changed for another 3 years if it doesn't work. Last year, we took the motion to Congress for the trial rules. We put an awful lot of effort to make sure that motion got the 2/3 on the floor, and we explained it. I think it was, you know, obviously this year it was challenging in the league. They were very successful. They started to work very well, and then the shutdown came, so we didn't see them in a league final, which I would have loved to have seen them. We're rolling them into the championship, which I think will be very successful. I would hope that when we go to Congress next April, we will go back on the back of a very successful championship trial rules, and people will adopt the trial rule, those rules. But that will take work from the players, and that will take work from people on the ground. And in some ways, that's what we need to mobilise, is those players coming forward and saying, we want to try these rules. These are the rules we want to keep going forward. So I would urge people, if you've enjoyed the trial rules, which I think all of us have, then let's take it to Congress next year and support them and be vocal in your support of the trial rules. There's a teeny bit of tweaking to go on, but by and large, we had very little issues coming with the trial rules. So to me, they've improved the game dramatically. The game has changed hugely over the last couple of years between strength and conditioning, nutrition and all of this. Our game is unrecognisable to where it was 10 years ago. Our rules should absolutely be different to where they were 10 years ago, because the game is different. So I would say it's going to be a huge change for intercounty particularly, and even for club and all levels. I think it's going to move the game on hugely if we can get them over the line. So I would say to all those people who are so supportive on Twitter and everything else, get behind the trial rules.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're going to Congress in April, make sure that you're mandating your delegates that you want these trial rules in permanently. If we can do that, you know, the intercounty game in so many ways is such an improvement and has progressed. And when Camogie maybe started to have a small bit of money and a small bit of sponsorship, decisions were made to push the intercounty game and to put the money where it was. I think it's progressed hugely. And now we probably need to start focusing a bit more on the grassroots, because if we go out to our clubs and we look at the coaching and, you know, I mean, I saw startling statistics that says, you know, there's twice as many male coaches as there's female coaches, you know, so this is unbelievable that we say at a nursery level, you know, we're not getting the coaches in there, we're not getting the female coaches in. And if we don't have female coaches and we don't have female officials, then we don't give a girl something to see that is normal and everyday. I mean, this year, if I'm not mistaken, we have no female intercounty coach.
No, you're correct, yeah.
Manager,
and
you know, and to me,
in Kilkenny, I don't think we played any game against a female coach.
You know, and so I suppose what I say is let's focus, you know, absolutely keep focusing on the 1% and the intercounty player. And that's what I've done for 6 years as chair of competitions. But we've got to focus on the grassroots, because if anybody in Hurling and Camogie will tell you that you've got to have them trained right and trained properly, because by the time they move through the nursery ages, you've either trained them into bad habits or you've lost them because you've trained them wrongly. So to me, let's put a focus back on the clubs for a little while and try and upskill there.
And no, it's a very interesting point, and I suppose, like, I'm involved in the colleges obviously as well. I think maybe the third level have probably led the way with regards to female coaches. Like, I know WIT had and Downey Ursula Jacob, and this year they had Iona Heffernan and a few more of them involved. And like, we would have had Caught Van, Eve Ryan this year, we've been Kelly, Claire Harry, Fakeen. So I think like the third level are kind of leading the way, but it hasn't quite, I suppose, dissipated down into the club scene quite yet, has it? But it's probably a two-way thing, is that maybe the girls themselves having the confidence to step up and do it, and maybe the clubs have given them the opportunity to do it as well. But no, look, valid point about the rules. I think your fellow countyman Ray kind of jumped the gun on the rules there for your Ireland final, and it was a great spectacle. I think he knew what was coming down the line. So fair play. It was the game of the year, and look, you know, the referees do contribute to these things, you know, by just letting it go. And I know it's not necessarily within the rules last year, but it was still great to see it. You touched on something. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I mean, they do, but, you know, tactics contribute to a game as well. And I think sometimes people forget that, because we've had games where, you know, if you're going to camp 13 people in the one half, the game's not going to flow the same as if it's 15 on 15. So, absolutely, you know, there's lots of things. But yeah, I agree with you. Last year's All-Ireland, I thought, was an absolute spectacular affair. I thought the referee, I thought all of them did very well. But he may have preempted where we were going.
Wouldn't be like Ray, sure, look. Well, look, I suppose, like, you touched on something there about physicality, and like Liz Howard was the first person that ever kind of coined the phrase women's hurling in an article years ago in the Examiner. That's probably where the idea maybe seeped into our head. I know maybe Kathleen had been kind of on record of being maybe slightly against the game going overly physical over the years, but you said there, look, we have a breed of modern physical athletes that are, you know, they're going through universities, they're doing their strength and conditioning programs, the counties, everything is going forward. Like, are we a million miles away from the game simply being hurling played by women, or is that a pipe dream?
Or Camogie played by men?
Yeah, either way. Either way.
I don't think we're a million miles. There's things, I think, in Camogie, you know, the flicking of the hurl, there's certain skills in Camogie that maybe that they're not there in hurling.
Get you killed in a hurling match.
and we wouldn't want to give them up, you know. So there's certain things, I think it's a two-way street. It's about an appropriate physicality for the age group as well, which is the other thing. Yeah. We do have, I suppose, a difference in Camogie is that if you're 15, you can play in an adult Camogie team. If you're 17, you can play in an intercounty. You can line out for Cork seniors at 17, you know, so you can't do that in hurling. So I do understand when people say, you know, they have a concern on the physicality, you know, so I think it's a balance. if we had everything was right and every single player was lining out against a player of the equal ability, the equal age and the equal probably stature, then, you know, you could say we're moving that way. But I think there is, like, I look at hurling sometimes and I think, would you just move the ball? You know, and we do that. You know, hurling for a little while probably wasn't as good as it's become again. So they drift in and out of stages. At the moment, I think camogie is particularly free-flowing. And I think that's great. And I think the new rules will make it even more free-flowing. It's a personal preference. I like a free-flowing game. I don't particularly like a defensive game. But look, it has its place. But it does come down to the style that a team is going to play as well, and not just the rules.
No, of course, yeah. And you know, we do get caught up in that a little bit. And so I think Paddy would be the first to admit, and Anne Downey as well, Joe, playing sweepers and playing people, they probably didn't contribute to the spectacle themselves either. And then there's a lot of frees involved. And so, yeah, no, look, I think definitely let's give the new rules a chance. And the first impression is positive. So hopefully we get a good spectacle. Obviously, they've come at the wrong time, maybe with the champs being played in the winter instead of the summer. But look, you can't control that. So you just have to give it a bit of time. I suppose the GA president, Hilda, when they get appointed, they set up advisory committees. And I suppose over the last maybe 6 or 7 months, in our time on the podcast here, we've had a lot of guests on who have a lot to offer the game, but maybe don't have an outlet for it. Like Sarah Donovan, Fiona Hickey, Ursula Jacob, these kind of people who've done it all in the game, are successful in their careers. Is that something that happens in camogie? If it is or isn't, is it your intention to maybe try and tap into these people and get them on groups to help give their thoughts on where the game could progress?
I think it happens sometimes. It doesn't happen nearly as much as it should. We did it a couple of years ago with a fixtures review, which was very successful. We did it with the trial rules, which was very successful. We put a working group in place. You know, it's very hard to get sometimes to get people to sit on a committee, but if you give them a finite time and a specific job to do, it's much easier to get these expertise. And we've got Sarah O'Connor from DCU on our committee, yes. And mainly because we're only asking her to commit to a limited project. I think going forward, that is probably the way we are going to get people, because experts are there in a particular field and they don't particularly want to go to a meeting where they'll spend half an hour listening or 2 hours listening to something else and they'll contribute for 10 minutes. That would annoy me hugely,
yeah.
Equally, if I was to do it.
Definitely, you know? Yeah.
So, you know, if your expertise is, you know, strength and conditioning, you don't want to know about the rules because to you, that's fairly irrelevant. You're going to contribute on coaching or strength and conditioning. Definitely would be where I would see we're going forward. I would think that we've got to bring in people as well from outside. I'm a firm believer in you've got to look to others and see what others are doing. There's no point just insular and looking within yourselves and your own group. There's huge expertise out there in Ireland and overseas, and if we can tap into that and tap into the goodwill that camogie does have, I think then you'll progress the game on further. Obviously there's always going to be a role for your committees and your volunteers. They contribute enormously to how camogie operates and to keeping camogie on the road. But you supplement that with a working group or a task force or whatever you want to call them. But you give it 6 months, you give it a tight time frame, you put them under pressure, and you need them to come back with the suggestions that they have looked at. To me, when they come back, then like the trial rules, you take them on board because that's the job you've given them to do. Otherwise, you might as well do it yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you've hit the nail on the head there. Like, we were blown away by the amount of goodwill that's out there. Like nobody has ever turned us down to appear on the podcast or anything. It's something like it's almost mind blowing. Like it's just kind of everyone is so willing to just drive the game on. And you know, if we are critical of it, it's because we care so much about it. It's not because we're trying to put it down or anything like that. I suppose finally, Hilda, if we can fast forward to 2024 and hopefully it's not a virtual congress again. We'll surely be out of it at that stage, touch wood. But if you're giving your last speech as the president of the association, what would you have liked to have achieved in your
I suppose get the games back out in the short term. But no, look, I think we need to be financially secure ourselves. I think we need to stop having 40% of our funding comes from grants, and that's not viable. We need to ensure that our sponsorship is secure, and we need to progress ourselves, that we're out in the marketplace. Camogie is a wonderful product, but it is a product. And you've got to sell that product and get it out there. So I'd love to see that we're featuring much heavier. And not just camogie, I suppose women's sport. I think sometimes we look into ourselves too much, but camogie's got to step forward, and they've got to push the women in sport, because we're 120 years nearly now established, and for most of that, or certainly a good portion of that, we were the voice for women in sport. And I think we've got to ensure that we do that going forward, and we collaborate with the other sporting organizations. I'd like to see that we had a growth in the game across all counties, and I think that's something that I'm very passionate about. It shouldn't matter what your financial, what your geography, or what your gender is. It is about the equality of opportunity for the game. And to me, that's what we've got to widen the game open to all counties, to all financial sectors. So we're not just relying on the senior counties. We all recognise that the senior counties are brilliant, but camogie is prominent in most counties. I think the only county we don't have a club in is Sligo. So, we need to push that, and we need to ensure that there's a minimum number of clubs and a vibrant club game all over the place. And I've always thought that sometimes we forget about the club. We start with the club, we sometimes move away, and then we move back to the club. And I think we've got to focus on the club, because the inter-county game is brilliant. It's 1% and it's our showcase, but the club player has got to be looked after. And I think this year there was debate where the fixture schedule went. I was absolutely a firm supporter of putting the club out first, because I thought that is where it should be. The club is where our members are, and it is where our support and our communities are. So I think we focus on the club, we build our clubs up. And in many ways, I suppose in 2024, I've always dreamed big for camogie, and I suppose sometimes we can say, well, look, that's not possible, that's a little bit difficult, but we've got to start saying to ourselves, well, why is it not possible? What's stopping us? What's stopping us dreaming big, and stop worrying about everybody else? Focus on us being the best product we can be, and us securing our future. You'd want to think that we're going to be here in 200 years. You'd want to think in 200 years we won't need a voice for women in sport, that it will actually all, or not even in 200, I suppose in 130 years, we want to think that it's not about women's sport or men's sport, it's just about sport. If we're somewhere down that line, that would be good. If we were all the way down by 2024, I might be very shocked, but I'd certainly be very pleased.
Yeah. No, that's it. And look, you hit the nail on the head there, especially at the clubs. The guy who thought the association had missed a trick by not having the county on when there was nothing else. But look, by the end of the summer, it was great. There was such a sense of community. It was so vibrant. Players really enjoyed it. And look, it was definitely the right thing to do. The man in the White House gets a presidential pardon if he thinks people have been hardly done by. So if we run into a bit of trouble with referees or anything over the next couple of years, can I give you a shout, or what's the story?
Oh, I'm not sure now, Adrian. I'm a firm believer in respect to the referee.
So
I've always said to the same thing to every single manager I meet in the sideline. If I don't see you and you don't annoy me, then you'll be fine. But if I see you and you start to annoy me, then you're in trouble.
No, that's it. But look, Hilda, thanks very much for joining us. I wish you the very best of luck when you do take over. I know you'll have a year shadowing Kathleen first, but you'll be heavily involved, and I'm sure we'll see a few of the different grounds around the place for the championship. So again, thanks very much. You're welcome on anytime, and the very best of luck with it.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Adrian. Thanks.
That was Hilda Breslin, the Uachtaráin Tuffa, not the president, as I made the mistake of saying at the start. Really refreshing, energetic conversation. Great to have her on, and hopefully we'll have her on again over the next couple of years. So we're up and running. Series 2, episode 1 is in the can. Coming down the line, we have some really, really interesting projects that we're going to announce for our sponsors. We have a great team of pundits on board for the championship. Fiona Hickey, Sarah Donovan, Katrina Park. A serious lineup. Myself and Dave will be back trying to not make bad predictions again. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're on the podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. It makes all the difference. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much.